Hello, 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 Year 7. Hello, it is lovely to see you. I hope you all had an absolutely wonderful long weekend. I hope you guys all managed to maybe do something for VE Day, whether it was watching something on the telly, whether you managed to do like a social distancing street party or something. Even if you didn't, I really hope that you enjoyed the long weekend. The weather was glorious, wasn't it? It was so beautiful on the Friday and the Saturday, particularly. Anyway, we are back with The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Before we get started on the book today, I just want to let you guys know we are going to have a spelling test on Friday. So before Friday, you need to look up the meaning of these words and you need to learn how to spell them. Your words are machine, comfortable, grammar, solemn, sluice gate, ivory, and cordial. I know sometimes it can be quite hard to understand the words as they're said on Show My Homework, like the little voice that gives you spelling test words, but I will always put the words in the test in the order that I give them to you. So these words will also be up on Show My Homework, and they'll go on the test in the order that they're written there. So hopefully that will help you know which word is coming next and know which word you're being asked to spell. Anyway, back to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the story so far. Let's recap over chapter 8. So Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy have had a lovely dinner with the Beaver family. Lucy is very worried about Mr. Tumnus. She has started asking Mr. Beaver lots of questions about where he might be. The Beavers tell the children Mr. Tumnus probably in the White Witch's house, and he may have been turned to stone. This is the thing that the White Witch does to people that displease her. But the only way to save Mr. Tumnus is to find Aslan. Aslan is the king of Narnia, the great lion, and the 4 children will meet Aslan tomorrow at a place called the Stone Table. And there are 2 prophecies in Narnia. One says that Aslan will defeat the White Witch and bring back summer. And the second prophecy talks about 4 thrones, so like where kings and queens sit, chair kings and queens sit on, in Cair Paravel, which is like the capital city, the main castle in Narnia. So there are 4 thrones in Cair Paravel, and when 2 human boys and 2 human girls are sitting on these thrones, then the White Witch will die. And this is why the White Witch is so worried about Peter, Edmund, Susan, Lucy, because it's 2 boys and 2 girls. Might be that prophecy, maybe. But suddenly, everyone realises Edmund is missing. They go out into the snow to look for him, but quickly they realise he has betrayed them. He's gone to the White Witch. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, Edmund has suddenly told the White Witch where his siblings are. He's probably going to tell them where they're going to meet Aslan, and she's going to arrive to attack them. So they need to get out of the Beaver's house as quickly as they can and find themselves somewhere safe to be. So, chapter 9, in the Witch's house. We are moving to Edmund's perspective now. We've looked at all of the family together with the Beavers. This chapter is now what's been happening to Edmund since he's run off without them. And now, of course, you want to know what had happened to Edmund. He had eaten his share of the dinner, but he hadn't really enjoyed it because he was thinking all the time about Turkish delight. And there's nothing that spoils the taste of good, ordinary food half so much as the memory of bad magic food. And he had heard the conversation and hadn't enjoyed that much either, because he kept on thinking that the others were taking no notice of him and trying to give him the cold shoulder. They weren't, but he imagined it. And then he had listened until Mr. Beaver told them about Aslan, and until he had heard the whole arrangement for meeting Aslan at the stone table. It was then that he began very quietly to edge himself under the curtain which hung over the door, for the mention of Aslan gave him a mysterious and horrible feeling, just as it gave the others a mysterious and lovely feeling. Just as Mr. Beaver had been repeating the rhyme about Adam's flesh and Adam's bone, Edmund had been very quietly turning the door handle, and just before Mr. Beaver had begun telling them that the White Witch wasn't really human at all, but half a djinn and half a giantess, Edmund had got outside into the snow and cautiously closed the door behind him. You mustn't think that even now Edmund was quite so bad that he actually wanted his brother and sisters to be turned into stone. He did want Turkish delight, and to be a prince and later a king, and to pay Peter out for calling him a beast. As for what the witch would do with the others, he didn't want her to be particularly nice to them, certainly not to put him on the same level as himself. But he managed to believe, or to pretend he believed, that she wouldn't do anything very bad to them. Because, he said to himself, all these people who say nasty things about her are her enemies, and probably half of it isn't true. She was jolly nice to me anyway, much nicer than they are. I expect she is the rightful queen, really. Anyway, she'll be better than that awful Aslan. At least, that was the excuse he made in his own mind for what he was doing. It wasn't a very good excuse, however, for deep down inside him, he really knew that the White Witch was bad and cruel. The first thing he realised when he got outside and found the snow falling all around him was that he had left his coat behind in the beaver's house. And of course, there was no chance of going back to get it now. The next thing he realised was that the daylight was almost gone, for it had been nearly 3 o'clock when they sat down to dinner, and the winter days were short. He hadn't reckoned on this, but he had to make the best of it. So he turned up his collar and shuffled across the top of the dam. Luckily, it wasn't so slippery since the snow had fallen, to the far side of the river. It was pretty bad when he reached the far side. It was growing darker every minute, and what with that and the snowflakes swirling all round him, he could hardly see 3 feet ahead. And then, too, there was no road. He kept slipping into deep drifts of snow and skidding on frozen puddles and tripping over fallen tree trunks and sliding down steep banks and barking his shins against rocks till he was wet and cold and bruised all over. The silence and the loneliness were dreadful. In fact, I really think he might have given up the whole plan and gone back and owned up and made friends with the others if he hadn't happened to say to himself, when I'm king of Narnia, the first thing I shall do will be to make some decent roads. And of course, that set him off thinking about being a king and all the other things he would do, and this cheered him up a good deal. He had just settled in his mind what sort of palace he would have, and how many cars, and all about his private cinema, and where the principal railways would run, and what laws he would make against beavers and dams, and he was putting the finishing touches to some schemes for putting Peter in his place when the weather changed. First, the snow stopped. Then a wind sprang up and it became freezing cold. Finally, the clouds rolled away and the moon came out. It was a full moon and, shining on all that snow, it made everything almost as bright as day, only the shadows were rather confusing. He would never have found his way if the moon hadn't come out by the time he got to the other river. You remember he had seen when they first arrived at the beavers a smaller river flowing into the great one lower down. He now reached this and turned to follow it up. But the little valley down which it came was much steeper and rockier than the one he had just left, and much overgrown with bushes, so that he could not have managed it all in the dark. Even as it was, he got wet through, for he had to stoop to go under branches, and great loads of snow came sliding off onto his back. And every time this happened, he thought more and more how he hated Peter, just as if all this had been Peter's fault. But at last, he came to a part where it was more level, and the valley opened out. And there, on the other side of the river, quite close to him, in the middle of a little plain between 2 hills, he saw what must be the White Witch's house, and the moon was shining brighter than ever. The house was really a small castle. It seemed to be all towers, little towers with long pointed spires on them, sharp as needles. They looked like huge dunces' caps or sorcerers' caps, and they shone in the moonlight, and their long shadows looked strange on the snow. Edmund began to be afraid of this house. But it was too late to think of turning back now. He crossed the river on the ice and walked up to the house. There was nothing stirring, not the slightest sound anywhere.
Even his own feet made no noise on the deep, newly fallen snow. He walked on, past corner after corner of the house, and past turret after turret to find the door. He had to go right round to the far side before he found it. It was a huge arch, but the great iron gate stood wide open. Edmund crept up to the arch and looked inside to the courtyard, and there he saw a sight that nearly made his heart stop beating. Just inside the gate, with the moonlight shining on it, stood an enormous lion, crouched as if it was ready to spring. And Edmund stood in the shadow of the arch, afraid to go on and afraid to go back, with his knees knocking together. He stood there so long that his teeth would have been chattering with cold, even if they had not been chattering with fear. How long this really lasted, I don't know, but it seemed to Edmund to last for hours. Then at last, he began to wonder why the lion was standing so still, for it hadn't moved 1 inch since he first set eyes on it. Edmund now ventured a little nearer, still keeping in the shadow of the arch as much as he could. He now saw, from the way the lion was standing, that it couldn't have been looking at him at all. But supposing it turned its head, thought Edmund. In fact, it was staring at something else, namely a little dwarf who stood with its back to it about 4 feet away. Aha! thought Edmund. When it springs at the dwarf, then will be my chance to escape. But still the lion never moved, nor did the dwarf. And now, at last, Edmund remembered what the others had said about the White Witch turning people into stone. Perhaps this was only a stone lion. And as soon as he had thought of that, he noticed that the lion's back and the top of its head were covered with snow. Of course, it must only be a statue. No living animal would have let itself get covered with snow. Then very slowly, and with his heart beating as if it would burst, Edmund ventured to go up to the lion. Even now, he hardly dared to touch it, but at last he put out his hand very quickly and did. It was cold stone. He had been frightened of a mere statue. The relief which Edmund felt was so great that in spite of the cold he suddenly got warm all over, right down to his toes, and at the same time there came into his head what seemed a perfectly lovely idea. Probably, he thought, this is the great lion Aslan that they were all talking about. She's caught him already and turned him to stone. So that's the end of all their fine ideas about him. Pooh! Who's afraid of Aslan? And he stood there, gloating over the stone lion, and presently he did something very silly and childish. He took a stump of lead pencil out of his pocket and scribbled a moustache on the lion's upper lip and then a pair of spectacles on its eyes. Then he said, "Yeah, silly old Aslan, how'd you like being a stone? You thought yourself mighty fine, didn't you?" But in spite of the scribbles on it, the face of the great stone beast still looked so terrible and sad and noble, staring up in the moonlight, that Edmund didn't really get any fun out of jeering at it. He turned away and began to cross the courtyard. As he got into the middle of it, he saw that there were dozens of statues all about, standing here and there rather as the pieces stand on a chessboard when it is halfway through the game. There were stone satyrs and stone wolves, and bears and foxes, and catamountains of stone. There were lovely stone shapes that looked like women, but who were really the spirits of trees. There was the great shape of a centaur, and a winged horse, and a long, lithe creature that Edmund took to be a dragon. They all looked so strange standing there, perfectly lifelike, and also perfectly still in the bright, cold moonlight, that it was eerie work crossing the courtyard. Right in the very middle stood a huge shape like a man, but as tall as a tree, with a fierce face and a shaggy beard and a great club in its right hand. Even though he knew it was only a stone giant and not a live one, Edmund did not like going past it. He now saw that there was a dim light showing from a doorway on the far side of the courtyard. He went to it. There was a flight of stone steps going up to an open door. Edmund went up them. Across the threshold of the door lay a great wolf. It's all right, he kept saying to himself. It's only a stone wolf. It can't hurt me. And he raised his leg to step over it. Instantly, the huge creature rose, with all the hair bristling along its back, opened a great red mouth, and said in a growling voice, "Who's there? Who's there? Stand still, stranger, and tell me who you are." "If you please, sir," said Edmund, trembling so that he could hardly speak. My name is Edmund, and I'm the son of Adam that Her Majesty met in the wood the other day, and I've come to bring her the news that my brother and sisters are now in Narnia, quite close in the beaver's house. She wanted to see them." "I will tell Her Majesty," said the wolf. "Meanwhile, stand still on the threshold, as you value your life." Then it vanished into the house. Edmund stood and waited, his fingers aching with cold, and his heart pounding in his chest. And presently the grey wolf, Fenris Ulf, the chief of the witches' secret police, came bounding back and said, come in, fortunate favourite of the Queen, or else not so fortunate." And Edmund went in, taking great care not to tread on the wolf's paws. He found himself in a long, gloomy hall with many pillars, full, as the courtyard had been, of statues. The one nearest the door was a little fawn with a very sad expression on its face, and Edmund couldn't help wondering if this might be Lucy's friend. The only light came from a single lamp, and close behind this sat the White Witch. "I'm come, your Majesty," said Edmund, rushing eagerly forward. "How dare you come alone?" said the witch in a terrible voice. "Did I not tell you to bring the others with you?" "Please, your Majesty," said Edmund, "I've done the best I can. I've brought them quite close. They're in the little house on top of the dam just up the river, with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver." A slow, cruel smile came over the witch's face. "Is this all your news?" she asked. "No, your Majesty," said Edmund, and proceeded to tell her all he had heard before leaving the beaver's house. "What? Aslan?" cried the Queen. "Aslan? Is this true? If I find you have lied to me—" "Please, I'm only repeating what they said," stammered Edmund. But the Queen, who was no longer attending to him, clapped her hands. Instantly, the same dwarf whom Edmund had seen with her before appeared. "Make ready our sledge," ordered the witch, "and use the harness without bells." Why do you think the witch wants the harness without the bells? Interesting. Okay, lovelies, so that is the end of chapter 9. It's starting to get a bit dangerous now. There's starting to be some real danger going on. As usual, you don't have to submit any work for these questions, but they're here for us to have a little think about before we read the next chapter. Why do you think Edmund is so quick to betray his family? Why is he so desperate to get out and tell the White Witch everything? Do you think the White Witch is actually going to be nice to Edmund from now on? Is she going to make him prince? Will she make him king? Will she even give him more Turkish delight? What do you reckon? And the same question we always go with, what do you think is going to happen in the next chapter? And we will get the next chapter on Friday. Speaking of Friday, you have got your spelling test. So your work for Friday, it's going to be your spelling and vocab of these words, and then listening to chapter 10 as well. Your words are machine, comfortable, grammar, solemn, sluice gate, ivory, and cordial. And I'll make sure these are also on Show My Homework for you to see them later. Other than that, lovelies, have a fantastic rest of your week. You know how to get in touch with me or how to email me if you have any questions. Please take care. Please look after yourselves. Bye.